This podcast is a collaboration between Costard and Touchstone Productions and the Dads from the Crypt podcast. Hi, I'm Alan Katz, and this is the How Not to Make a Movie podcast, the making of Bordello of Blood, episode 6. It came from the cutting room floor. If you've listened to the previous 5 episodes of this podcast, you've heard what a joy it was making Tales from the Crypt, and how much the Tales creative team loved working together. You've heard how antithetical the whole process of making Bordello of Blood was to the process of making Tales. You heard stories about Erica and Dennis and Angie, and about Sly, and about Joel. Where Dennis is concerned, my original intent was to be as even-handed as possible. I thought my issues with him were my issues, and I dealt with them in my head. I didn't expect that so many of us, Gil especially, still resented the Dennis Miller experience with such passion almost 30 years later. I let the group speak for itself. Doing this podcast was more cathartic for more of us than I anticipated. Alas, telling a story always demands making hard choices, what to keep, what to cut. To tell you the story of Bordello of Blood's tortured making, I had to leave some really great stories on the cutting room floor. That is, until this episode. Ain't podcasting grand? In this episode, I'm going to share with you some of the interviews and stories that didn't make that final cut. It kills me that I couldn't use as much from our casting director, Victoria Burrows, as I wanted to. It was so much fun talking to Victoria again.
I remember sitting in a TV movie producer's office and getting a call from Gil. I was an assistant to Barbara Clayman when we did Up the Pentagon, which you spoke about.
Yes. Okay.
In the podcast.
Sure. Okay.
And I was her assistant. And he calls me out of the blue and he says, I have this half-hour, piece that I want you to take a look at and tell me what you think. So he sends it over and all it says is yellow on it. Doesn't tell me anything, says read it and tell me what you think. And I remember reading it and it had such a aha, payoff ending. And I called him and I said, well, I love it because it's all men and I'd love to do this. And he goes, okay, well, now I'm going to tell you that you will take a meeting with Robert Zemeckis. And I was like, oh, okay. So I put together some ideas and I went and met Bob and we had a lovely conversation over at Universal. And next thing I know, Gil's telling me, hey, you got it. Let's do it. It's a half hour. Bob's going to direct, as you know, and Joel Silver and blah, blah, blah. Tales from the Crypt. That was a life changer, game changer that Gil gave me. Yeah. I couldn't understand why he remembered me after all these years of being an assistant on this movie, Up the Pentagon, which was also, a very tough project to work on.
Here's Victoria talking Tales.
It was just the way you guys were talking about it. It was the most fun I've had in doing episodic. It was so special to be able to go out on the set and see the actors work, and you'd be building one set and we'd be filming another. And it was magical on that side. But the difficulty is all the hurdles we had to accomplish in getting it done. And, when you have a Bob Zemeckis or a Donner, you get whoever you want for scale plus 10, which
that's an important thing to point out in about Tales from the Crypt. HBO, hey, it's HBO, but, they don't pay for shit.
No. And it was scale plus 10. That is it. Take it or leave it. And I'm calling them. Hi, would Arnold Schwarzenegger like to do this? Yeah.
and how many million will you be paying Arnold? Scale plus 10. Ooh.
Yeah. Yeah, about $1,500 for 5 days.
Yeah.
This is what we did over and over and over again. And
it's amazing who we got. Tales never had a home base. We moved from warehouse to warehouse every season. Some were in good neighborhoods, some not so good.
I just loved being out there in Chatsworth with you guys. Well, weren't we next to like a porno studio next door?
Yeah.
And so the actors would walk in there thinking they were coming to us. Oh my gosh.
What kind of shop are you people running here?
Yeah, exactly. I thought it was Tales from the Crypt, not Tales from the Strip.
Like the podcast says, the feature films gnawed away much of what made doing Tales from the Crypt so special. Ernest had someone else in mind, right? Oh, that's right. Ernest had someone else that Ernest Dickerson had his own person in mind. Okay, so you...
Yeah. That hurt my feelings.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's talk about that because Ernest also had his own set designer in mind, and we didn't use Greg Melton.
Yeah.
And so this was all right. So in retrospect, as I look back at it, all right. Suddenly the feature films pop up, and some of the band are getting the call, and some of the band aren't getting the call.
Right.
This cannot be good for the band.
Well, in retrospect, to me, in looking back on a casting career, it's very fair that a director brings in somebody he's comfortable with.
Sure.
At the time, it's like the band is together. We're all, running so smoothly. It's like just amazing. And then you're told, oh, he's bringing in somebody else. And all of a sudden you feel like, oh, I'm not worthy. You go through that insecurity part. And I know we all go through it. And it was just one of those moments, so.
Another voice I wish you'd heard more of is Ed Tapias. When I say Ed was so much more than just Gil's assistant, I mean Ed always knew where all the bodies were buried, usually because Ed helped bury them.
I was temping at MGM of all places, and Victoria Burrows, wonderful casting director, called me long in the days before cell phones and texting and said, hey, the guys from Tales from the Crypt are looking for an assistant. You want to join them? And I remember thinking, God damn, I love that show. That would be awesome. So I remember I gave my resume to Victoria, and she forwarded it to these two people named Gil Adler and Alan Katz. And I was especially excited because it was associated with Walter Hill and Richard Donner and Bob Zemeckis and David Giler. These are filmmakers that I absolutely loved. So the idea that I would get to work with and around
Didn't
Bob
love
Zemeckis
Joel?
and
You didn't love Joel?
actually,
what you mentioned Giler, but not Joel?
no, but I got to tell you several funny Joel stories later, but Joel ended up being very, very good to me. And so, yes, he was part of that because I loved those movies at the time. And this is before The Matrix and a lot of the stuff he did later. I mean, this is still Lethal Weapon and, those crazy action movies. But what's funny is that when I met with Gil Adler and Alan Katz, they hired me, which was awesome. But what I found out, and what you may not know, Greg, is they only had 3 weeks money for me in the budget. That's all they had. And they didn't tell me. They literally had me for 3 weeks, but they decided somehow to keep me on more than the 3 weeks until they sold something. Unfortunately, about 6 weeks later, they sold a bunch of stuff. So my 3-week job ended up being a 5-year job because they kept selling stuff.
Production designer Greg Melton, talking Crypt.
Thinking back on it, I'm like, how did we pull it off? Knowing what I know today, it's just like, because we were down to sometimes like 4-day turnarounds between episodes. Mm-hmm. But I believe, I'm trying to remember when I first heard that it was in the offing, Tales from the Crypt. It might have been just before we went down to San Diego to do Haunted Lives.
Now you had a relationship with Gil. Did you work on Freddy's Nightmares?
Yeah, I did the second season. That's where I met Gil, and you was on the second season of Freddy's Nightmares.
Right. I know from the writing perspective, that show was wacky. The whole concept, because it was the first season, it was hours that had to be, you could break them up into 2 half-hour shows for syndication. So it had to make sense as a half hour and as an hour. And then the second season, they had to make sense as 2-hour movies as 2 hours that made sense as independent hours, and as 4 half hours it made sense as independent four half hours.
Wow.
It was, now from the I know from creating the story, it was nuts. Was designing that show crazy?
Well, yeah, I mean, that was sort of the template that we took into doing Tales from the Crypt, and that, you know, the only way to pull it off was to run those night crews for building, because we didn't have time to build set.
Right. That's right.
We didn't have a mill, so we devised that whole night work scheme.
Right.
Where we would, you know, finish and come in and tear out and put in another set, and then we use that same sort of process.
Sure.
To do Tales from the Crypt.
So the answer to the question is yes. The craziness that we were forced to do on Freddy's helped out.
It did. I mean, the only thing on Crypt is we had 2 stages.
Hey, Greg, tell the story how you got Tales.
We were down in San Diego doing that Haunted Lives.
Yes.
And I remember Gil telling me the way I came into it was, we're going to do this thing, you know, I want you to do it, but you got to get past the executive producers, you know? So I said, okay, what do I got to do? And he goes, all right, he said he'd tell me, and I finally got a call, and he goes, okay, you got to run over to Sony, to stage 15, and meet Richard Donner at 4 p.m. today. Yeah. And I went, okay, so, you know, they had a drive on, I went there, there was nobody to meet me, there was nothing. I literally opened the stage door, walked onto the set, and he was doing Radio Flyer. Here. You know, he was filming Radio Flyer, and it was, you know, stage 15. That's the biggest stage at MGM. It's where they did Munchkin Village. And, there's just sets everywhere, and I'm literally going through sets. I like here on the other side, I think they're filming over there. And I remember I went over there, and he's filming, and I'm like, I tapped somebody. I said, I have to talk to I was trying to, you know, find out who to talk to. Finally found a second AD. And finally, I met Richard Donner. He had a break, and we went off and went to a trailer. And basically, he goes, so Adler wants you. I go, yeah, I'm coming. I worked with Gil last year. I'm just a snot-nosed 30-year-old, you know, kid at the time, and I brought my little, you know, book to show him, and he really didn't look at the book. He goes, well, if Gil wants you. You look like you'll be great. And then the AD goes, we need you back on the set. That was it.
You look like you'll be great.
You look like
you're
a nice guy.
Yeah, you look the part.
Okay, did I just get the job? You know?
You look like you'll be great. You look like you'll be a great production.
Yeah, I never even got to show the book. I was just like, okay, he was too busy.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, it was hilarious.
But hey, that was kind of how the Crypt world worked, man.
That's how I got in. So
the challenge in Crypt world was, of course, you know, reinventing the wheel every 5 days.
Yeah.
And the wheel could be anything.
It would.
And I've told people over the years that anybody that wants the best kind of training for any kind of film production is to work on an anthology show.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because once you do an anthology show, a regular television show becomes easy and a feature becomes boring.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, after doing them for 4 or 5 years, I've never done one again, because they don't do a lot of them.
No, not anymore.
You know, it's too expensive. I don't know.
And it's hard to do well.
We were always looking for, you know, some angle, you know, to have fun with. I mean, so some of the, you know, like the one we did with Malcolm McDowell, I always remember really enjoying.
The Reluctant Vampire.
Yes. There was all kinds of fun sets in that.
Getting to work with some really amazing directors along the way too.
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, Walter Hill was like top of my list, you know, growing up, is one of my all-time favorites.
Yeah, me too.
You know,
that was, and also just to see him work. I mean, we had directors that would come in and had their processes, and they were all different. Walter would come in the first day of prep, and he's like, okay, on day 1, the first scene, we're going to do this, then we're going to move over here, then I'm going to turn around and cover it there. He would give you the whole day, and you'd be out in 10 and a half hours because everybody knew exactly what they were supposed to do.
Yeah. Well, I remember the first time I went on a scout with him on that first episode that he did that I was involved in, I think Deadline. I remember we went down scouting, around 5th and Broadway, Maine, that area. And,
dive bars. Looking for dive
oh
bars.
my God. He knew every dive bar. He knew everything, and it's like, all right, we're going to shoot at the King Edward. We're going to go to the alley behind. It was all laid out.
The King Edward.
And then I realized, I go, these are all the locations from 48 Hours. He knew them all. He's like, we're going to do this. We're going to jump across the street and do the pawn shop here. We can go. And I'm like, oh my God, this guy's like brilliant.
It's like the best of Walter Hill.
Yeah. But yeah, he was very, very, just a wonderful man, and a very, very easy, knew what to do, got his shots. And
working with him, that was, because like I said, as you said, this was someone that you admired when you walked in the door. And now suddenly here you are, not just meeting him, but you're working. You are now.
Yeah. Well, believe me, I was just all over, just trying to absorb everything that I could from him, and also just, it's hard when you meet your idols, because it can go one or two ways.
And it has for me. On Tales, there was a couple of idols I met that I was like, ooh.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Who was an idol, Ed?
Well, Walter was one. Dick Donner was another one. I was a huge fan of Russell Mulcahy before we met, through the music videos.
Lovely guy.
I mean, Russell was somebody who, A, he's very cool, and B, he's all over the place creatively. I mean, he was just, the ideas he would toss out. Yeah. And it took me a while to realize that he just has no filter when he's pitching stuff. And that's why so many of his music videos were so amazing, because he would just see stuff that other people didn't see.
Yeah.
And a lot of stuff he said to me didn't make sense. Then I'd see it filmed. I remember there was one episode, the one with Catherine O'Hara.
Oh, sure.
You remember that?
99.something%.
Exactly. I don't know if you'll remember this, Alan, but we had like an 8 o'clock call that morning, and like 10 a.m. we still hadn't gotten a first shot. And Gil said, check with Lee Webb, find out what's going on. We still don't have a shot. So I went down. We were in Lassen at the Chatsworth stages, and I walked onto set and I asked Lee, what's going on? He goes, yeah, we're still setting up. And I'm like, okay, but it's been 2 hours. We still don't have a shot. He goes, it's okay. We're fine. Hour and a half later, Gil comes to me and goes, what the hell is going on? We still don't have a shot. Go out there, find out why we're not shooting. So I go out there and Lee goes, we're still setting up, Ed. We're still setting up. He goes, tell Gil we're okay. And it was like, we had like 6 pages we were trying to do before lunch, because we had something like 3 pages after lunch. It was like an 8.5 page day. And then I get back and I hear on the walkie, literally 20 minutes later, scene's complete. We're done. We're like, wait, what? Wait, how did we set up for 4.5 hours? And if you remember, it was a 5-minute one shot with the crane that started on their feet, went up to the judge, had her walking in through the room. I mean, it was brilliant and it was amazing. And it was like, he didn't tell anybody.
Great visual stylist.
Yeah. But he's another one who when I met him, I was like, he was everything that I expected. I mean,
the other big idol that I had was John Frankenheimer. I really wanted to do a good job for him. We built an entire library in 6 days for him on that episode.
Very particular was John.
Very, really tough guy. I mean, he would make Lee and John Leonetti and I sit in his office all day long while he was prepping. He wouldn't let us leave. I'm like, there was like one chair in there, like John and I are sitting on the floor against the wall.
Oh my God, like he owned you.
Like he owned it in this tiny little office out there in Van Nuys. And he'd go, guys, I was doing the train, I had 200 days on the train, and we're sitting here going, does he know he has 5 days to do this? I mean, it was the funniest, he'd start telling us some story about Burt Lancaster or something.
You just reminded me of something, Greg, of Elliot Silverstein kind of doing the same thing to Chris Faluna during prep.
Yeah, absolutely. Elliot was the same kind of guy that could just like, on Cat Ballou, he would come off with something. But I've learned a lot. Like Elliot, I remember we had to do a scene with we needed to find a place to have Malcolm McDowell walking, right? And we had no place. We're on location, and we were someplace over, by towards Highland Park, and we only had like this one little piece of sidewalk. And I remember Elliot going, okay, And then he actually made something out of it. He like started high over him because we had nothing to shoot. And he did this whole kind of shot at night, and it turned into like a pretty good walking shot, which I thought had no hope.
What was your experience working with Bob Z?
I have just one quick anecdote that stands out to me that just showed me, it taught me so much about just being a good leader. And it was when we were doing the Humphrey Bogart episode. And I don't know if you remember this, Greg. It was me and you and Lee and Rick Boda. Everybody was around this car because we were trying to figure out how we were going to do the final piece. And I remember it was a set PA, Stephanie Sane, that kind of raised her hand and said, "What if we just use the rear view mirror?" And Bob was like, looked around to all of us and was like, "Really, the set PA? Really?" And he ended up using that. But there was no ego involved with Bob. He was like, "That's a great idea." He just took it, and gave credit where it was due. But it's that kind of thing where the good ideas can come from anywhere, and you take it and you give credit and move on.
I think I remember on that episode, obviously Bob is just in a whole world of himself, but he was just so creative, like I remember we were like trying to it was really more kind of, he's so good with like production problems. Which really surprised me. He had everything else laid up, but boy, he knew production. He's like, all right, we got this car. It was the same episode. The car's like plowed into a tree or into a ditch.
Right.
And we're trying to figure something out. We got to do this. And he's like, we just need another car and then we can do everything. And we're like, oh yeah, right. We have another car over here and this, then we can get everything done that night. It was literally like a $3,500 fix.
Right.
To make the episode happen in whatever the days were. And it was just like, just the light bulb of creativity with him was always very exciting to watch, something develop.
When you watch a Bob Zemeckis movie, there's usually one or two moments where it's an impossible shot. It's impossible. And as he laid it out to the whole crew as to what was in his head, the question he was asking was, how are we going to do this, guys? And really, he was throwing it out there for everyone. The first day that we worked on Bob's episode, that last episode, the one with You Murderer, where Humphrey Bogart plays the dead body hero. You built that 4-wall set. It was fantastic. And Bob invited everybody in the crew onto the 4-wall set to have that first conversation. And even craft services was invited onto the set. And he explained kind of what the process was very briefly. And then he said, all right, guys, here's where I think the shot's going to start. And he started in one corner. And then I think then this happens. And what happens then? Okay, then this happens. Okay, then we have to go over here. And we have to go over there. And then I think, then we got to go all the way down in this corner over here. And then he turned around, and he looked at everyone, and he asked that question. Okay, guys, how are we going to do this? And when it gets thrown open, literally there were answers that might not work all the way, but there were no bad answers. It could come from literally anywhere. And in that way, literally, we all took ownership of this thing.
Yeah.
I agree. This man taught everything I know about collaboration. I learned at that man's feet.
Yeah.
For me, another Zemeckis moment too was when he came into the editing room for Demon Knight and cut out like 4 minutes, and it changed it completely. It was like, I don't know, maybe 6 minutes. It wasn't a lot, but it just tightened the whole thing up, and it worked so much better. And it was just really tiny cuts here and there, stuff that none of us noticed until after it was fixed. And we're like, oh yeah, that's so much better.
Yeah.
I think of the lesbian relationships that he invented for Bordello of Blood between Angie and Erica that we never shot except for one pickup. The whole thing is intimated. We never shot any such thing. Bob did that in the editing room out of bits and pieces. Oh, we'll get there.
Todd Masters had some amazing stories that woulda, coulda, shoulda been there, starting with how he got Tales.
When did you go aboard Crypt?
Pretty much day one, actually. I sculpted the Crypt set, actually.
Were you part of Kevin's crew?
No. I was part of the art department of the original. What is it? 5-episode series. The whatever the low count episode series season was. I knew people in the art department. They knew they had to make this crazy crypt set. They knew that I knew how to sculpt foam, and so they kind of said, well, hey, could you make this cool set? I'm like, okay. And so I started sculpting this thing, and just as it developed, it became more figures, and I pitched more demons to put in there, and I pitched this gigantic statue's head in there, and Joel started kind of walking around. I started kind of getting him involved because I knew a bunch of people that he knew at NYU. And so all of a sudden I'm like, I get kind of into the fold, and then we go into the noodle factory down in
the A1 Globe.
Yeah, and so they called me again, and they go, well, you're the crypt guy, right? I'm like, okay. And so we put back together the crypt, and then they're like, well, we need skeletons, and we know it. Well, we got that stuff. So we started supplying the crypt with all the stuff, and then we started doing all the wraparounds with Kevin, not part of his crew, but kind of as part of the art department. And I kept telling Bill Teitler was the producer back then, and I kept saying, I said, I'm happy to have this job taking care of the crypt, but I actually am a makeup effects kid. I do monsters and shit. That's what my studio really does, and your show is filled with that stuff. Why don't you give us a chance to do that? And they're like, yeah, whatever. And that happened until season 3, I think it was.
Right, when Gil and I came aboard.
Yeah, it was right before that. We did an episode called with Moses Gunn, I think was in it.
The one about the mortuary.
Yeah, where he chops his feet off to shove them into the coffin. What was that one called? Anyway, so we did that one. It was a lot of fun, and I think it went really smoothly. And it was really funny because we're kissing, all the butts of all the people that just suddenly vanished. And then you guys show up. And I'm like, wait a minute. I've been working all these years to tell people that I'm not part of the art department to kind of slip into the makeup side. And I'd finally gotten in, and you guys come in. And I remember meeting you guys, and I think you already had somebody. And I was all of a sudden, I was back to being the crypt guy again, which, whatever. And then it took, I think, a couple episodes in for me to kind of start jumping into your guys' stuff.
My dad was the medical consultant.
Oh, wow.
On the show, because my dad was a general surgeon.
Okay.
And so I started off whenever I had questions of, what would be a really disgusting thing. My dad was a surgeon. When I grew up, our dinner table conversation was, what he was operating on that day.
Yes. Fantastic.
If you were squeamish at our dinner table, you were not going to last long. Because it was either, what my dad had worked on that day, what he had cut open. I saw this appendix today. It was so infected, you wouldn't believe it. I mean, the pus was coming out of here.
Liver's delicious.
It was that or the Vietnam War, which was on TV at the time. So, take your pick. My dad was the medical consultant, and for Whoopi's episode, it took place in the jungle. And it was about a hidden pearl. And John Rhys Davies played this plantation owner who had hidden the pearl in his gut.
Got it. Okay.
And what my idea for, wouldn't this be disgusting, is if you had to reach your hands into the man's guts to get the pearl. So you'd have to kill him, slice into his guts. And what if he was riddled with worms?
Ew.
And so that in order to put your hand in and grab the thing, these things they could theoretically infect you through your pores. This was my crazy. Hey, wouldn't that be great and disgusting if? And my dad and I said, hey, all right, hey, Dad,
do I have a project for you?
And my dad said, well, not really. That's not really how anything works out here in reality. There are schistosomes, he said, which are kinds of, microscopic worms. But schistosomes in your gut and schistosomes that can penetrate your skin are really different creatures entirely. But I said, no worries. I don't worry about that. If my audience is asking that question, I've already lost them. I said, schistosomes is schistosomiasis, I think it was the condition that he had his gut. All right. So I I don't remember now if when we did that episode, if I went to you and I said, "Hey Todd, schistosomes."
I hope you did, but actually I think it was Mike Spatola.
Oh, you're right.
I think it was Mike Spatola's episode.
Okay.
He was.
I've just wasted all our time telling.
Not a problem. I've got Mike right over here. Hey, Mike. No, I'm kidding. Mike's a good friend. No, he's a wonderful artist. He did quite a few episodes. I think the same season. And I think I came in. There was an episode. Was it the one that Tom Hanks directed? I think it was. I think
that was you. That was the first. So that was the next season where you became the guy.
That's right. I think I finally reconvinced the producer of the show that I got my makeup effects job.
And that's when it became a fairly, as of that season, when I would go looking for you back in your department, and sometimes you and I would sit with the pathology textbooks open.
Yes. Oh God, I still have that horrible book too, and it's covered in monsters.
Horrible. It's wonderful.
Oh, it's so colorful. It's beautiful, horrible, but it's just disgusting. I don't think you can find it anymore.
Well, it's my dad, having been a surgeon, the literature that he would get, the JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association publications, and there was. Oh God, there was another publication he got all the time that was for surgeons, which had amazing artwork. I mean, just stunningly realistic, almost photorealistic artwork. I forget the name of the artist. He was quite good.
Oh, fantastic.
But, they would, like, every possible awful thing that a surgeon might encounter was this guy's artwork.
Right. But how fantastic for a boy's imagination.
Of everything Todd ever did for Crypt, my very favorite makeup effects gag was the meatloaf butt steak that Todd did for the What's Cookin' episode.
Oh, Meatloaf, our buddy Meatloaf. We've lost a few good ones from Crypt days. Yeah, Meat, as he wanted to be called.
Mr. Loaf to you.
Do you remember that meeting we had about his size?
When we cast Meatloaf, the episode was called What's Cookin'. It was about a couple.
Gil. Actually.
Yeah, Gil directed. It was about a couple. Christopher Reeve played the wife, and Bess Armstrong played the husband. Bess Armstrong played the wife. A couple who own a failing restaurant that serves only squid. He's looking for. Well, they're about to lose their restaurant. They're going out of business, and the homeless guy who sweeps up for them, he's got an idea for something, but they poo-poo it. The next day, they show up. Just the wife goes home. The landlord shows up to collect the last of the rent, and he's going to lock them out. And the husband goes home to give her the bad news. They show up the next morning figuring it's the end, and there's a pile of fresh steak in the refrigerator. What the hell? They throw the fresh steak onto the grill, and man, the smell is intoxicating. The next thing you know, there's a line of people out the door. And the homeless guy who sweeps up, he says, "Yeah, I know a supplier." And as the supplier, and as the first bunch of steaks has been exhausted, and the homeless guy says, there's some more in the walk-in refrigerator in the back,
the freezer. Yeah,
Fred, follow me. And the homeless guy was played by Judd Nelson, and Chris follows Judd into the meat locker, and they're hanging dead on a meat hook is naked Meatloaf. and of course, in the scene, Chris's character, Christopher Reeve's character, is horrified as he watches Judd Nelson's character approach with a tray and a butcher's knife, and he whacks off a big hunk of meat and then another hunk of meat, and he slaps them onto the tray. And he walks past Christopher Reeve, who's still standing there, gobsmacked, and he says, "Hey, don't leave the door open, he'll spoil." All right. So that was the scene. And the challenge was to create the
naked meat.
The naked meat from which to take the butt steaks. Now, the problem was this was, as a body cast, a complicated cast. And it would, how much time really to get that right would it really have required, just start to finish?
Oh, to actually make that dummy? Well, I mean, that was supposed to be a really hero dummy with a section that you could slice. I mean, it was like an effect and everything.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we should have had like a month on that. I think we had.
Right, we had 3 days.
Yeah, it was crazy. You
know? Yeah. I mean, we had the idea, and then we cast Meatloaf 3 days before he he played. So there was no way to do it. Yeah. I mean, and we had talked about Meatloaf, and we hoped we were going to get Meatloaf, but we didn't have Meatloaf. He wasn't signed until 3 days before he worked. So we would have cast someone else, of a similar body type, but we went with what we thought.
He's perfect. He was perfect for it. He would have been able to feed a restaurant full of people. That was the whole point.
You used how heavy was the body model, the body that the human who you actually based the body on?
Pushing 400.
Wow.
I mean, I think he was upper 3. Not that I don't remember us actually weighing him, but Meatloaf walks into our meeting. I guess he must have just fell off the plane or something. And we're expecting, to just whisk him away and mold him like that day. And he walks in and he's thinner than you.
Yeah. He had just gone on a crash diet.
Like a Jenny Craig thing or something like that.
He was proud.
So proud of it. He was because he was known as the fat guy for decades. The sweaty, fat, singer that, was that was his brand. And he walks in looking like Alan, and Alan looks like you're what, 180?
108. I'm 120 if I'm lucky.
Oh, well, okay. See, I live in a different, I'm a big guy myself, so I'm hoping for 100. I keep looking to 180, thinking that that's what, thin people live like. I guess I'm still
I am small of stature.
Okay, well, I'm still a monster, but I'm, slowly becoming thinner. How about that?
But
aiming for 180. But
he was, Mr. Loaf was quite, when he saw the body that you had used in place of him, he was not happy.
Well, he was especially not happy because we gave him little junk.
You gave him a little.
We gave him little junk.
Little junk.
And because it's not like we molded. So we found some other actor, and we just used Meat's head, and then we fused it together in that quick making of body period. And it's not like we molded the actor completely naked. He probably had shorts on, so we had to sculpt a certain part of it. And so when it came time for the the twigs and berries, we're figuring, well, he's in the freezer, it's not really going to be seen, so we're not going to put a gigantic schlong on there, and we're certainly not going to make him a Ken doll.
So we're so sensitive.
Well, honestly, we were thinking story. It's in the freezer, he's dead. And he's big, so he's not going to have much. And so Meat was really mad about that. And
but there wasn't much anyone could do. But to add in a way to add insult to the injury, in order so that this now thinner Mr. Loaf would match the body double that was going to be hanging in the meat locker, he could not appear as the svelte loaf that he now was. As the diet loaf, he had to, where we had to put a considerable bit of padding on him so that he would look like the old, heavier meatloaf.
Yeah, ye old fat suit, which actors love those. And so he so he really, I know he hated me. I don't know if he hated you.
Well, it's not what he bargained for.
Yeah. So
it's not like we paid anybody.
Years later, we actually did a similar dummy duplicate body of his daughter, who I think Cyndi Lauper called her Little Loaf, and lovely person. It was for Carnival, and I was just kind of like scratching my head before she came in. It's like, I'm sure she's never heard this story. I'm sure she's never heard my name. And she came in, it's like, I've heard all about you. And it was just like, oh my, it could have happened like an hour before. She was great, but it was pretty funny that it's still pretty fresh in the family conversation.
Of course, the hardest story is to leave on the cutting room floor the Joel stories. Colleen Neistat was our Canadian production manager, and she's currently a Vancouver city councillor.
Well, if you remember Vancouver, that theater was on Hastings Street in a really bad part of town. It's since burned down.
That wasn't our fault.
No, it wasn't our fault, but that was right down in Hastings and Maine area, which is pretty serious territory as Vancouver goes anywhere nowadays. But Joel came down there. I don't know if you remember that, because I know you want to talk about Joel. I mean, it's so bad down there that the Teamsters are hiding in the trucks. No one wants to come out into the alleys behind that. What was the name of that theater? And Joel comes. This was after obviously after the airport incident when we got him into town. But everybody's hiding, and Joel goes out the back of the and starts walking up and down the alley with, what year was that? 1993. What year was it?
3.
And with the cell phone of the time, and he has these big hands and the cell phone, and he's wearing, the guys used to call him, the Teamsters called him the Pajaminator, because he wore this kind of muumuu pajama outfit.
I recall
and he's just
Lee Knippelberg, our first, actually coined the term.
The Pajaminator.
Yes, it was Lee.
Yeah.
He came up with that.
So anyhow, everybody's hiding because they don't want to go into the alley. And Joel is just walking, yelling his top of, today you'd think that he was one of the mental patients down there.
When it comes to Joel stories, nobody has Joel stories like Gil's. And these are the ones that didn't make the cut.
But I've always had a place in my heart for him, oddly enough, because of all the work that we did together and how we worked. When we worked together, maybe more after Crypt than during Crypt, was our relationship was one of argument. We would only argue. We never had a conversation. And, he would call me at home and I would answer the phone, or Ginny would say it's Joel. And I would get on the phone and she would know within 30 seconds who I was talking to, because my vibratory level went from talking to you like this to being equal to him in screaming and yelling at him. In fact, I once had an argument with him. I said to him, Joel, we don't talk to each other. We only argue. And he said, no, what are you talking about? We talk all the time. I said, no, we don't talk. We argue, which then led into a heated argument about us not talking, but arguing. I'll never forget it. In fact, I remember at the end saying to him, you see what just happened? I'm trying to have a conversation with you, and now we're having an argument. And we're having an argument about why we're not having a conversation, we're arguing. And that was sort of the summation of the relationship for all the time that we worked together. And it was sort of sad in one respect, but in another respect, I still have that, admiration for seeing whatever he saw in us and continuing on with me with these other movies and, giving me that opportunity. And it's sad. I find it really sad, because here's a guy who was very instrumental in our careers early on and in my career later on, and who I actually liked working with when we were talking about material, which only happened when we were alone. Behind closed doors in his office, we could talk about material and we could actually talk about making good material.
How would you describe Joel's strengths?
Well, there is a passion. And, for me, it's always started with passion. Whatever I've done, it's always been, passion about doing it. And then you figure out how to do it. And it seems to me, Joel has that. Sometimes I think he gets lost after the acknowledgement of the passion. He gets lost in the execution of how do you get to that place, whether he threatens you or, demands this or demands that, or in some respects, he's his own worst enemy. And in some respects, I kind of understand the frustration of passion, trying to make that passion into reality and all the obstacles that are in the way. And, sometimes I think I should have been more like him. And sometimes I'm very, very grateful that I'm not, because I probably would be dead. And it's really interesting, because a lot of people along the way, especially in interviews, and when we talk about Joel, they go, it's so unbelievable that you and Joel worked together for as long as you did, because you guys seem like, totally two different kinds of guys. And I said, well, we were, but maybe that's why it worked. So years pass, and it's now, I don't know, probably late 90s. And so our movie came out and we've all gone on, and I get a call. I was represented in those days by CAA, and I get a call from my agent saying, first of all, what we think is you should be a TV director. And I go, well, no, I'm a film producer, and I write with Alan, but maybe I want to direct a little more. And they say, well, you should be a TV director. And so the next thing I hear from CAA is, that this new show, Fantasy Island, Jerry Josephson is producing it. And he's asking for you to direct an episode.
Huh.
So I get a call from the agent. I go, no, I don't want to do television. You sure? Because it's in Hawaii. They're shooting in Hawaii. And because of the schedule, you'd have to be there about 8 weeks. And I said, no, I don't care about Hawaii, and I don't care about the 8 weeks. And I hang up, and I'm really upset, right? And I go in to see my wife, and my wife said, what was that all about? And I said, well, they want me to go to Hawaii and direct an episode of Fantasy Island. And she said, and I said, and I told him no. And she said, so you turned down a job to direct a network show, Fantasy Island, with somebody Malcolm McDowell, and we'd be in Hawaii for 8 weeks, all expenses paid, plus they're going to pay you a salary. Is that what you just did? And I said, do you want to go to Hawaii? And she said, well, that would be nice. So I ran out of the kitchen, ran over to my office, and I called back my agent, and I said, well, I'll do it, but I want to read the script first. And they called me back a few minutes later, and they said, the trouble is they would love to agree to that, but they can't agree to that because the script isn't written yet. I said, well, then how am I going to commit to it? I don't even know what the hell they're doing. And he said, well, this is what they can do. They can make sure if you agree to do the episode, when you leave LA, on the seat, when you get on the plane, will be the script. And I said, that's bullshit. That's never going to happen. Well, that's what they're offering. So we said yes. And I get on the plane. Sure enough, there's a script. So I read the script 2 or 3 times. My wife reads it 2 or 3 times. We get off the plane, and they take me right to a production meeting. Don't go to a hotel, go right to and I sit down with the executive producers, who are now the executive producers of Chicago Med.
Huh.
And very established and very good writers. And I go into this room, and they said to me, so how do you see the war? And I start sweating because I'm like, the war? What the fuck are they talking about? So I said, oh, the war. Well,
war.
What were you guys thinking? And they said, well, no, we want to hear what you have in mind. And I said, oh, so could somebody just show me in the script where exactly what you're referring to? And in the middle of page 37, there's a sentence that says, the war begins, period. That's what they were referring to. So I, knowing that this means something to them, said, oh, well, the war, I want it to be like Private Ryan, but for television. And by the way, has the first AD done a board for this? Do we know how much time we have to shoot this particular scene?
The war begins.
Yeah. And so they said, oh, that's a good question. Yeah, let's get the first AD in here. So the AD comes in, and he goes, sure, I boarded it out. I haven't gone over it with Gil, but I have it boarded out, and I have a half a day for that scene.
For the war, it just says the war begins.
The war begins. So I go, half a day. Okay, so let's think about Private Ryan in half a day. So I want IMOs, I want 3 cameras, and I start spouting off. I have no idea what I'm talking about, and they are loving it. So they go, wow, that sounds great. Can you do it? And I said, the only thing I want to do, I ask you, is I want this to be the last half of the day of our 8-day shoot. Can we do that? Of course. Gives me more time to prep it. So I shoot this, right? Now, while I'm shooting this, I'm working with Malcolm. And Malcolm one day says to the AD, I need to see Gil privately. And I'm like, what did I do to Malcolm? I mean, oh my God, he's going to fire me. What? So I go behind the sets while they're redoing the lights, and I find Malcolm, and I go, Malcolm, what's going on? What's the matter? What's the problem? And he goes, no, there's no problem. I need you to listen to a conversation I'm about to have. I'm going to call up the head of ABC, and I'm going to tell him, we're doing the 4th episode now. I need you here every other episode. You're by far the best director we've had. You talk to the actors, you listen to what we have to say, you make adjustments. These other 3 Jamokas that before you, they got bigger names, they've done more television, they don't know what the fuck they're doing. So I go, Malcolm, I'm going to be real honest with you, okay? You don't want to do that. Because the fact is, I am frightened to death, because every shot I think of, I think there's a better shot. And so I'm not a happy camper.
I want to go home. And he laughs. And I go, no, Malcolm, I'm not joking. I'm dead serious. So he goes, okay. And he starts dialing the phone. And he gets ABC, and he gets I forgot the guy's name. It's Steve, can't remember his last name, Steve somebody, gets him on the phone. And now Malcolm has him on the speaker. And he goes, I'm here with Gil. And I just want to say, I need you to call CAA and book him for every other episode. He is great. And he starts, and I'm going, Malcolm, don't say that. No, Malcolm. He finishes the conversation, hangs up. And of course the guy says, I'm going to call CAA right away. So he gets off the phone, and I go, Malcolm, you're killing me. I can't do this. I'm not being coy. I'm frightened to death. And he goes, I love it. Just let's go back and shoot. So I go back to LA, and I said to him, look, I can't do the next one because they booked me to do Charmed, an episode of Charmed. So I go back to LA. I have about 2 days of downtime. I go do Charmed. By the time I finish Charmed, they had canceled that show. They had only made 8 episodes. I had only done the 4th one. So in the meantime, I finished the first day of working on Charmed. And I say to them, look, you've been shooting about a half a dozen episodes so far. It's the first season. And I said, I'm a new guy. So, if I say something or I set something up and you don't like it, or you don't think your character would do it, just tell me that, tell me why, and then we'll figure it out. So of course they don't believe that I mean that. So in the first shot that I set up, the 3 of them are all over me. And I listen to each one, and the AD is saying, come on, we got to shoot. And I said, no, we don't have to shoot. I need to get this right. And so I talked to the 3 ladies and find out what I go, okay, so how about if we did this instead of I'll dolly this way, you move this way, you move that way. And I go, Shannon Dougherty, is that good for you? Yeah. And I asked the other 2 gals, and they said, well, yeah. And so I shot it that way. And we had a great day, because every time we set up a new scene, I would say, okay, this is what I'm thinking. This is what I see. And let's try it that way, and let's block it out that way. And if you guys have any conversation, to offer up, let's have a conversation about it. Now's the time. And of course they, would test me a few times. And then finally it got to the point where they loved everything. So I finished shooting the day, and I go home. The phone rings and my wife answers the phone, and she says to me, there's a man on the phone. His name is Duke. He wants to talk to Gil Adler. I go, who is he? I don't know. I just told you what he said. My name is Duke. I want to talk to Gil Adler. So I get on the phone. I go, hello? And he goes, hello, is this Gil Adler? I go, yes. He goes, this is Duke Vincent. Now, Duke Vincent at the time was Aaron Spelling's partner and owned Charmed. He goes, this is Duke Vincent. Do you know who I am? And I said, oh, yeah, I know who you are. What's the matter? And he says, what did you do to my girls? I'm thinking, oh, my God, what did they say to him? I mean, oh, my God, I'm probably not going to work tomorrow. And I said, very defensively, I don't know. What did I say to you? I don't think I said anything. Why? What did they say I said? And he said, they called me each individually, not together. And they just said, you got to get this guy for every other episode of Charmed. We had a great day. We had fun. And he was really, so now I'm like, oh, okay, cool. So I go, oh, that's so he goes, so I'm going to be calling CAA tomorrow to try to make a deal with you, right? I hang up and I'm thinking, well, that's interesting. I mean, I don't know if I want to do this or not. And I'm sitting there, and about an hour later, the phone rings, and it's Joel Silver. And Joel starts yelling at me going, what the hell is the matter with you? I know what you're doing, and I don't like it. You're producing for me. And what is this nonsense with the television? You got to stop it. And I said, Joel, I don't know what you're talking about. The thing in Hawaii is dead. The show's got canceled. And he goes, and what about Charmed? I said, how do you know about Charmed? I just finished that. And he goes, don't you worry about how I know everything in Hollywood. I know everything. And of course, Ronnie Meyer was a really good friend of his. So he says, so you got to stop. You got to stop right now. No more television directing. I go, Joel, I'm just filling in and making a living until we green light our next movie. He goes, I'm green lighting the movie right now. And I go, Joel, I'm sorry. You can't green light the movie. You're not Warner Brothers. He goes, I am Warner Brothers. He goes, well, I said, well, you can't green light the movie. And he goes, okay. You want a check? I'm going to send you a check. I'm going to send a check for $25,000. I said, Joel, this is not about money. And this is not about a check. It's just that I'm not making a movie right now. I don't have a movie. So I'm working. When you're ready to make a movie, we'll discuss that. And we get into this big blowout and we both hang up the phone, right? And I'm sort of shaking. I'm so pissed off. About an hour and a half later, the buzzer rings outside and it's a messenger from Warner Brothers. And I figured, oh, it's another script that they want me to look at. And so the guy comes over and he gives me a little envelope.
We'll go to the check.
And I open up the envelope and I'll never forget this. It was a check from Warner Brothers, not from Silver Pictures, for $50,000. Enough said.
Just for being you.
And I never directed another television episode because the next day I went and I had my office in Warner Brothers and we started the next picture.
And finally, there's this one. How it all came to an end between Gil and Joel.
When we finished Superman Returns in Australia, Bryan Singer and I were on the lot and we were walking, I think back from lunch. And it's like the scene in The Sting where the two guys are coming at each other and that one is the assassin and one might be killed. And I see in the distance, Joel is walking with the director of Gothica towards us. And this is the first time I've seen or been near him since I broke his phone.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking to myself, oh God, what's going to happen here? Is he going to, cream me or take a shot at me or something? And I'm with Bryan Singer and we're talking. And Bryan, a few months earlier, had a conversation with Joel about some movie. So when we reach each other, Bryan goes, hey, Joel. And they stop and we stop. And I had said to Joel, I'll never talk to you again. That was my last word to you. I'll never talk to you again. And so we pass now, it's like 2 years later, we pass on the lot and Bryan says, hey, Joel, how you doing? And Joel goes, oh, Bryan, hey, how's everything going? And he says, yeah, we're doing, we're finishing Superman in the editing room. And Bryan, with a lapse of memory, says, do you know Gil Adler? He's my producer on Superman. And Joel looks at me and goes, yeah, I know him. How you doing? And since I had said I'd never speak to him again, I went, oh. I wouldn't answer with a word, right? At which point I see at the corner of my eye, Bryan realizing what a faux pas he had made. And of course he knows I know Joel Silver. And so he exits, we leave, and we're walking away. And now they're walking away in the opposite direction. And Bryan, about 10 steps later, stops me and he looks at me very ashamed and goes, I'm so sorry. Of course I know you know Joel Silver. Oh my God, how could I have been so stupid? How could I have said that to you? And I said, it's okay. It's okay. Doesn't matter. But that's how it was. And I never spoke to him after that.
It's ironic, don't you think, that a relationship with Joel would end with a whimper instead of a bang. On the next episode of the How Not to Make a Movie podcast, the making of Bordello of Blood, the dads from the crypt finally get their chance to step out here onto the stage. We may think we told our story, but apparently there are unanswered questions. We'll answer them all next time. See you then. The How Not to Make a Movie podcast is executive produced by me, Alan Katz, and by Jason Stein. Our artwork was done by the amazing Jody Webster, and Jason and Jody, along with Mando, are all the hosts of the fun and informative Dads from the Crypt podcast. Follow them for what my old pal the Crypt Keeper would have called terrific crypt content.